Welcome back to the deep dive. Today, we are getting into the really terrifying and I think deeply self-reflective world of Stephen King.
Mm-hmm.
Specifically, we're looking at his 2002 collection, Everything's Eventual, 14 Dark Tales. And we have a pretty dense stack of sources here, the stories themselves, of course, but also King's own introductions and his notes, which are just fascinating.
They really are. And our goal today, it isn't just to talk about the monsters and the jump scares.
Right.
It's to really analyze King's role as, a cultural critic of his time. He uses horror as this lens to look at some really big ideas.
Like what, specifically?
Well, like the decay of certain art forms, which he seems genuinely sad about.
Yeah.
And then there's this weird, almost indecent commercialization of creativity he grapples with.
And of course, the different ways fear shows up in the modern world. It's not just ghosts.
Not at all. It's everything from, ancient occult forces to this very cold, very corporate technological kind of murder.
And before we even get into the first story, we have to talk about the structure of the book itself, which is just pure King.
Oh, yeah.
It's this mix of total professionalism and this, this playful, almost superstitious fatalism. He didn't organize these stories by theme or when he wrote them.
No, he left it completely up to chance. He talks about it right in the introduction.
He does.
He took the spades from a deck of cards, right? Ace through king for 13 stories, and then he threw in the Joker for the 14th.
And they just shuffled them,
Yeah.
like a gambler.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And he let the draw decide the final order of the book. He even claimed it resulted in, and this is a quote, a very nice balance between the literary stories and the all-out screamers.
It's such a weird way to put a collection together.
Yeah.
Does randomization actually create a better flow?
Or is it just King being king?
Right. Is he the master storyteller, just finding the narrative after the fact or sort of rationalizing the randomness?
I think it's just so characteristic of his whole philosophy. For King, writing is this active process of discovery, not just execution. And he totally embraces what he calls the amateur's slightly crazed pleasure in the business side.
So the structure itself is kind of a statement.
It is. It's saying that creative boundaries are meant to be pushed. They're meant to be rearranged, whether that's by shuffling a deck of cards or by, experimenting with completely new ways to get stories to people.
And he absolutely lives that philosophy.
Yeah.
This is the guy who was actively pioneering these cross-media formats way before it was common.
He was pushing into areas other big-name authors just wouldn't touch.
We're talking about things like visual novels, Storm of the Century, Rose Red.
And he reinvented the serial novel for a modern audience with The Green Mile.
Don't forget his famous leap into the earliest days of online publishing with The Plant.
And it's so important to note that he said his motivation wasn't purely about the money. It was about seeing the act, art, and craft of writing in different ways. He was trying to refresh his own process, to make sure the story stayed as right as possible.
It seems like he was always asking himself this question. How can I surprise myself and the publisher and you, the reader, all at the same time?
Exactly.
That brings us, I think, directly to the first major theme that really jumps out from the collection, and that is King's, his genuine lament for the obsolescence of certain art forms.
Yeah, he holds up poetry as an example of something that's better than ever, kind of thriving in its own niche.
But he really mourns the forms that needed a kind of cultural consensus or an infrastructure that, that just doesn't exist anymore.
And the main example he uses, he calls it a lost art, is the radio play.
Right, the radio play.
He has this deep admiration for its ability to let the listener see with our ears, The whole drama just unspooling in the theater of your mind.
And he gives this amazing, really deep-cut anecdote about his own attempt to revive it.
Which failed. Spectacularly.
Right. And to really get this, you need a little bit of his context. So at the time, King and his wife owned 2 radio stations up in Bangor, Maine.
WZONM, which was all sports, and WKIT-FM, a classic rock station.
And these stations were doing great in the Arbitron ratings, which, for anyone who doesn't know, that's the industry standard for measuring your audience. So basically, they were popular.
But here's the classic paradox of local media, especially in a smaller market like Bangor.
High ratings don't always mean high profits.
Not at all. The market was small, it was regional, and the stations were constantly, running in the red. They were struggling to get enough local advertising to cover their costs.
So King, who's always been a pragmatic businessman, he comes up with this, genuinely genius idea with his accountant.
The idea was to write and produce an original, classic-style Halloween radio play.
And the initial concept was super ambitious. It was supposed to start with Ted Nugent's Cat Scratch Fever playing.
And then it would cut abruptly to a news bulletin about a silvery disc descending on Pickering Square, a total nod to Orson Welles' War of the Worlds.
But the commercial genius was in the accounting.
Right. By recording this play and then syndicating it, selling it to other stations across the country, all that money they made could be classified as radio station income.
Which would totally bypass the local ad problem.
Yeah.
His accountant basically said it would immediately put the stations back in the black.
It was a creative solution to a purely commercial nuts and bolts problem.
But the art failed the commerce.
Yeah.
Despite all the motivation, the clear financial incentive, King just couldn't write the script. He talks about sitting down, super enthusiastic, and finding that everything he wrote just came out sounding like narration.
It didn't have that dynamic, overlapping dialogue, the sound effects, all the things that make a great audio drama work, the kind of thing you'd hear on old shows like Suspense.
He realized the art form was truly gone, not just because the tech changed, but because the cultural memory of how to write for radio and maybe how to listen to it had just vanished.
It wasn't the play he saw in his mind. It was just somebody reading descriptions out loud. The whole mechanism for that kind of art was, for him, extinct.
And that experience really feeds into his deeper worry about the short story itself.
Right. If the radio play is a lost art, he argues the short story is perpetually on life support, dangerously close to extinction.
He said when he sold his first story back in 1968, he was already seeing markets dry up. But by 2002, he felt the shrinkage was becoming terminal.
And he lists the casualties. It's a relentless list that really speaks to how reading habits have changed. He talks about literary magazines like Story disappearing,
which was such an essential launching pad for generations of young writers.
Then he points to genre places like Amazing Stories and the horror digests he grew up on.
Creepy, eerie.
All gone. And it wasn't just about the magazines, it was the whole culture around them. Those digests thrived on a specific kind of focused, disposable leisure time.
A kind of time that has been completely eroded by our constant digital lives.
He basically says that while there are passionate editors and small literary magazines keeping the form barely alive, their numbers just shrink every year. And he comes to this devastating conclusion. What's lost has a way of staying lost.
And this leads us to this core contradiction in King's whole philosophy, which the collection really forces you to look at.
He sees the short story as piecework, something done honestly by hand in the back room. He insists he hasn't sold out on the craft.
And yet, he then uses that same art form for this massive, unprecedented commercial experiment.
And we are talking about the story Riding the Bullet.
Yeah. We have to contextualize how this thing was made. He wrote it right after finishing on writing, while he was still recovering from that terrible roadside accident.
He says it explicitly. The intense focus he needed to write the story was the best painkiller he had, and it was a simple, old-school ghost story.
Just a classic twist on the hitchhiker who got picked up by a dead man.
But the delivery, that was anything but simple. It came out in early 2000, right at the peak of the dot-com bubble, and he published it exclusively as an ebook.
The success wasn't just big, it was a watershed moment for the whole publishing industry.
Oh yeah, hundreds of thousands of downloads. It crashed the servers. The audio rights alone went for what he called a comically huge price.
Over $100,000. He basically became a tech mogul overnight by accident.
And this is where his real insight comes in. The massive commercial success led to this profound frustration for him. He described it as witnessing the weirdly decadent state of the modern market.
He was everywhere. He was getting mobbed in airport lounges. He was on the cover of Time, front page of the Wall Street Journal.
And what drove him absolute crazy was the total, utter irrelevance of the story itself. He points out that all the guys in ties, the media, the analysts, they all wanted to know one thing and one thing only.
How's it doing? How's it selling?
Exactly. Nobody, he said, nobody asked how it was doing in the reader's heart. Was it succeeding there? Failing? Getting through to the nerve endings?
And that's such a critical point. He realized people were fundamentally more interested in the novelty of the package, the electronic delivery, than the actual story inside.
He felt that succeeding only because of an alternate market route, totally divorced from the story's quality, was decadent.
It wasn't a victory for the short story. In a way, it was maybe another nail in its coffin, another sign of its artistic extinction.
And this is a paradox we are still wrestling with today, right? We are constantly prioritizing the medium over the message.
It makes you wonder, though, if he had just sold that story to, say, Esquire magazine, Would the conversation have been any different?
Probably not, but the scale of the ebook success just magnified that disconnect. It made it impossible to ignore.
He asks this ultimate chilling question in the introduction. How many of the hundreds of thousands of people who downloaded Riding the Bullet actually read Riding the Bullet?
And he says he doesn't want to know the answer.
I don't blame him. It's a beautiful, dark irony, isn't it? The commercial success story of Riding the Bullet is really a horror story about commercial success.
At the end of the day, his message is pretty straightforward. If you want the short story to survive, stop worrying about the format and just read their stories.
Okay, so let's transition from the commerce of fear to the terror on the page itself.
Let's do it.
Because the collection is so focused on putting characters right up against their own, often very random, mortality, forcing them to confront the sheer immediacy of doom.
We're moving from the slow, economic death of an art form to the swift, impending death of the body.
And I don't think there's a story where this is more immediate and sensory than Autopsy Room 4.
Oh, man. Yeah. Howard Cottrell's situation. It taps into that primal fear of being buried alive, but it updates it for the terrifying reality of the modern medical machine.
He's fully conscious, but he's totally paralyzed. And he can hear the doctors preparing to dissect him.
The whole story just throws you right into his sensory hellscape. You hear everything. The squeaky wheels of the gurney, the scuff of their shoes, the casual chattering of the medical staff.
But the worst part, the absolute worst part, is the sound of steel instruments clanking onto a metal tray right beside his head.
And the genius of the horror here is King's use of hyper-specific medical terms to just amplify the terror. Cottrell, inside his own trapped mind, he's identifying the tools and the procedures.
He's picturing the stainless steel armature with the jiggly saw.
A terrifying piece of equipment used to cut off the top of the skull after they've, in his words, pulled your face off like a kid's Halloween mask.
Ugh. But the most visceral part is his anticipation of the pericardial cut. He hears the doctors talking about using poultry shears.
Or garden shears, just these big metal cutters to open his rib cage. And he's dreading the sound.
The snipped crunch.
Yes, the snip crunch as the bone parts and the rib cage springs open. It's a horror that attacks your ears, not just your imagination.
And all the while, his mind is just screaming. He knows he's paralyzed, probably from a snake bite on his leg.
King suggests in the afternote it might be a Peruvian boom slang, which he admits might not even exist, but the name just adds to this exotic, unique horror.
So Cottrell is just begging them in his mind, look at my left leg. That's the trouble, not my heart.
The heart they're just about to dissect.
And what makes it so much worse is the casual indifference of the staff.
Totally. When his arm bangs against the table, causing him excruciating pain, the doctor just mutters, whoops-a-daisy.
Or when he manages this desperate, frantic burp, the only sound his body can make, she just dismisses it as a routine post-mortem belch. She even makes a joke about Howie.
It's this subtle critique of bureaucracy and professional detachment. Their adherence to procedure prevents them from seeing the obvious signs of life right in front of them.
He's just reduced to wishing, long, agonizing cancer on them. Right before the student doctor, Pete, lifts those giant poultry shears and says, so chillingly,
commencing pericardial cut.
And the only reason he's saved is because the doctor pauses. She notices an old shrapnel scar in his groin, and it breaks the procedural momentum just enough for them to take a closer look.
The sheer randomness of it. Fate interrupted by a minor physical detail. But the psychological scar is immense. He's left with this slim but vital margin between sanity and some sort of nervous breakdown.
Now contrast that very modern, sterile horror with the messy, intimate, and historically grounded terror of the death of Jack Hamilton.
Right. This story takes a real historical fact that Jack Red Hamilton died this lingering death from a gunshot wound in 1934 while on the run with the Dillinger Gang. And it just infuses it with so much emotional weight.
It's less a story about bank robbing and more about desperate, doomed loyalty.
Dillinger and Homer Van Meter, they're trapped in this hideout, risking their own lives to take care of Jack, who is literally rotting from the inside out.
The details are so graphic, so focused on the sensory decay. Hamilton is covered in blood, he's struggling to breathe, and the gangrene is setting in, creating this stench that's so powerful they have to roll the car windows down when they move him.
And Dillinger, public enemy number one, he becomes this nurse who is just consumed by denial. He forces them to stay put, barricaded with Tommy guns, willing to die in a shootout for a man who is already slowly and agonizingly on his way out.
It really humanizes these criminals. The pathos just peaks in that final tragicomic scene.
Oh, yeah.
Johnny Dillinger tries to cheer up his dying friend by asking Homer to do his incredibly bizarre trick with the flies.
Homer, who learned this trick in prison, he would rope shithouse flies with strands of thread.
And when he let go of the strings, the white threads would just float upright in the air. This moment of just utterly absurd, desperate artistry.
And it happens right as Jack is too tickled to know he was coughing his last. He's bent over, puffing blood onto the sheet.
It's the saddest gesture imaginable. Dillinger is smiling, but Homer sees it as the saddest grin I ever saw in my life. They couldn't give him a last meal, but they gave him one last show.
And speaking of doom and choice, we have to circle back to riding the bullet.
The story that was so commercially groundbreaking.
But which also has one of the most brutal choices of fate in the whole collection.
Alan Parker is hitchhiking to see his mother in the hospital, a scenario king tied to his own mother's failing health. And he gets kicked up by the ghost of George Staub.
Driving a Mustang, smelling of chemicals and the duller, blunter stink of decaying meat, with this visible stitched incision on his neck.
And Staub, who is just pure menace, forces Alan to choose who rides the bullet.
Which is this metaphor for a terrifying roller coaster from Alan's childhood, but now it represents a one-way trip to death.
Alan has to choose his life or his mother's.
The impossible choice. And Alan, under duress, he makes the raw, understandable decision to sacrifice his mother, who he thinks is already close to death.
But the real horror of this story is the long-tail consequence. Alan gets thrown out of the car, he finds his mother alive, and he tries to write the whole thing off as a hallucination.
But Staub left him a mark. A permanent, undeniable piece of evidence. He pinned his own "I rode the bullet at Thrill Village, Laconia" button onto Alan's shirt pocket.
And that button is the proof. It's the physical, repeated sign that the encounter was real and the choice was made.
Alan thinks he's gotten away with it, that his mother survived. But years later, after she has more strokes and finally passes away, he finds the button again, under her bed.
It's like a devastating moment. The choice was real. The debt was just postponed, not canceled.
He has to live with that permanent guilt marked by that button, forever knowing that he bartered away his mother's life. The horror is the inescapable, fixed nature of fate. The debt is just repeated over time until it's fully paid.
So if that part of the book was about immediate, inescapable mortality, this next part really delves into the mechanisms of terror. How King generates fear using systems, both occult and corporate. We're moving from, the smell of gangrene to the cold abstraction of digital murder.
Which leads us straight to the title story, Everything's Eventual. And this presents a vision of corporate psychic assassination that feels terrifyingly bureaucratic and modern.
We meet this character, Dinky Earnshaw. He's a simple delivery boy with this extraordinary, very specialized psychic ability.
An ability that was spotted yellow, like match flames, by this corporation, Transcorp.
And he's recruited by this guy, Mr. Sharpton, who's this sophisticated Mercedes-driving corporate handler. Sharpton sets up Dinky's entire controlled reality.
A house, a stipend, and access to this thing called Dinky's Dayboard, where he can request anything he wants.
Except pornography.
Right. And the cleaners will provide it. It's the state of enforced, benign dependence.
And the mechanism of murder is so chilling because it's so abstract. Dinky doesn't use guns. He composes letters.
But not in English. He uses this unique symbolic language he records in Dinky's notebook. It's full of these bizarre symbols with names like Sancophytes, Smims, and Bews.
And these letters get sent through something called Dinky Mail. It's a remote system for psychological killing.
And this connects back to King's critique of language, right? This symbolic language acts as a mechanism for moral detachment.
He's not writing "kill this person."
Exactly. He's composing the stylized, coded text so he can mentally justify it as just, fulfilling a technical requirement.
He admitted to killing over 200 people. And at first, he justifies it by targeting skippers, bullies, bad people who he thinks deserve it.
But the psychological toll eventually breaks him. The abstract nature of the killing only postpones the emotional consequence. It doesn't eliminate it.
He has this horrifying realization that he's an addict. He describes the act of composing these letters as providing a hateful fucking rush.
He understands he is unequivocally a mass murderer. And he admits the truth to himself. He did it for the rush, for the power, for the repetition of that successful kill mechanism.
But then Dinky decides to use the system against its master. He learns one critical personal detail about Mr. Sharpton.
The way he strokes his lucky tie, the one with the silk swords on it.
And this personal detail allows Dinky to create a final, special letter, personalized for Sharpton, making his own execution eventual.
He closes his eyes and sees the trigger word, the ultimate command floating in the darkness, like black fire.
The word is Excalibur. It's the story of the psychic pawn turning the abstract corporate murder weapon on the corporate master. It shows that even a highly controlled system can have a single exploitable word.
Now, if everything's eventual, deals with the terror of new corporate systems, then the road virus heads north, swings right back to embrace this raw, ancient, uncontainable form of the occult.
We're following an author, Richard Kinnell, who buys this simple-looking watercolor at a yard sale.
The painting shows this demonic-looking driver in a muscle car, crossing a bridge. And the title on the back, on a little piece of Dimetape, just says, "The road virus heads north."
Kinnell's intrigued by it, but as he's driving north toward his home in Maine, the picture starts to change.
And this is where the horror just escalates. The Boston skyline in the painting vanishes. The driver's filed teeth are clearer, and Kinnell realizes the car is now moving through Rosewood, a town he had just driven through himself moments before.
The driver's face is described as both shrewd and stupid, a terrifying combination that suggests this primal force that is, quote, done fucking with civilization.
You just can't rationalize this virus. Kinnell tries to destroy the painting by throwing it into a bog. He thinks he needs to wall this incident off in its own special niche with a mental trowel to protect his sanity.
He knows if he fails to patch the cracks in reality, everything would fall in.
But this occult phenomenon is completely uncontainable. It defies physical destruction. It defies psychological rationalization. Kinnell gets home only to find the painting has somehow rematerialized on his entryway wall. It beat him here.
And the final change is the most horrific. The painting now shows the yard sale seller, Judy DeInkman, decapitated. Her head is placed gruesomely on an ironing board.
And across the car's back deck, the words are now clear. The road virus, the sign from the sale comes back to haunt him. All sales final.
He realizes that authentic occult phenomena can't be dismissed. He has to try and burn the painting, acknowledging that the violence, the demonic repetition, is completely real.
And that brings us to another story about the total collapse of skepticism. 1408.
Which King admits he only finished because the first few pages, which he wrote as an example for his book on writing, just sort of seduced him into completing the tale.
The main character is Mike Enslin, a skeptical writer who profits from ghost stories he doesn't believe in.
He writes these cynical books like 10 Nights in Haunted Houses. And he's checking into room 1408 of the Hotel Dolphin, which is notorious for its horrific history.
Over 30 deaths, including 6 jumps.
And the hotel manager, Olin, desperately tries to talk him out of it. Olin is methodical. He lists the room's unique rules.
It hasn't had a paying guest since 1978. The physics of the room are just wrong. The key card system failed on it. Digital watches run backward or just die.
And Olin delivers this profound warning that's aimed directly at Enslin's specific moral hypocrisy.
He tells Enslin that he is precisely the kind of person who shouldn't stay there. An intelligent, talented man who doesn't believe one single thing he has written.
Enslin, who's used to winning these spook wars, is immediately defensive, but you could see the seeds of doubt are planted.
And the brilliance of the story is that the room doesn't rely on, immediate ghosts jumping out. The second he's inside, Enslin starts to lose his grip on reality. He gets this intense, nauseated vertigo. He sees the doors in the corridor as crooked.
His own perception is betraying him.
His mind starts to fragment. He's circling the pictures on the wall, convinced they're crooked, then correcting himself, realizing the door wasn't crooked either. His eyes had tricked him for a moment.
The room isn't just haunted. It's actively preying on his mental stability.
He even starts questioning his own vocabulary. He wonders if heebie-jeebies is some racist abbreviation for Hebrew jeebies. His mind is just spinning out into absurdity.
And when he tries to record his findings on his tape recorder, he makes this awful hollow joke about his dead brother being eaten by wolves one winter on the Connecticut Turnpike.
The room is psychologically tailored to him because he treats genuine darkness as this cynical tourist attraction to exploit for profit. The room forces him to confront the actual reality-warping thing he makes money off of.
His skepticism offers him zero protection.
In fact, it makes him uniquely vulnerable.
This theme of fate and choice, and especially repetition, connects so neatly to the final pair of stories we should touch on here. We see King using the concept of luck to illustrate this inescapable loop of unhappiness.
Yeah, look at Lucky Quarter. Darlene Pullen, this desperately unhappy maid gets an envelope with a scrawled note and a single quarter as a tip.
And she just laughs hysterically at the insult. Oh, you cheap son of a bitch. She's worried about her son's health, her daughter's braces. Her life feels like this constant struggle.
So she gives the worthless quarter to her young son, Paul, who just, for fun, puts it into a slot machine.
And he hits the jackpot. The machine just starts showering quarters into the tray.
And that one quarter becomes the catalyst for this incredible, sustained winning streak at the roulette table. It turns into thousands of dollars.
Which should solve all her problems, right? But it doesn't. When she's winning, with this crowd gathered around her, her hands shaking, she is just overwhelmed by unhappiness.
And she has this moment of bleak clarity. She concludes that even good luck was just bad luck with its hair combed.
The money just gives her a different set of problems.
Right.
But the underlying emotional junk pile of her life is exactly the same. The repetition is the continuous cycle of misery no matter what.
And that connects directly to the chaos theory of personal change in Lunch at the Gotham Cafe.
Right. Stephen Davis, whose wife just left him, he quits his 20-year, 40-a-day smoking habit just 2 days after she's gone.
A radical, noble act of self-improvement. It gave his shattered mind something concrete to pitch upon to handle his misery.
But the unpredictable violence that happens at the Gotham Cafe, where he's meeting his estranged wife and her lawyer, it makes him question everything.
During their lunch, this sudden, bloody event happens, and the lawyer, Humboldt, is killed. And Davis has this profound realization.
None of us can predict the final outcomes of our actions. And even when we act for the noblest reasons, the last link of the chain all too often drips with someone's blood.
The action of quitting smoking, which was meant to bring control and health, may have somehow altered the metaphysical calculus, leading to chaos and violence instead of stability.
And the afternote gives us that chilling summary that ties the whole collection together. The idea that hell might not be other people, like Sartre said, but simply repetition.
The inescapable loops of debt and consequence and unhappiness no matter what choice you make.
So if we synthesize all this, what we're really seeing is King's mastery of integrating the deeply personal.
His worries about his failing radio station, his mother's illness, the psychological toll of his accident.
With these expansive, terrifying genre concepts, he's showing us that modern terror is decentralized. It's found in the chaos of markets, the failure of language, and the emotional fallout of radical personal change.
And the stories that resonate the most, I think, are the ones that exploit that gap. The void where a clear, definitive answer should be.
It forces the character, and by extension you, the reader, to choose a narrative to fill that space. And that brings us back to the collection's philosophical heart.
LT's theory of pets.
Exactly. It's the story of L.T. DeWitt, whose wife, Lulubelle, disappears. The only hard evidence they find is her car and the dismembered remains of her dog, Frank.
And the evidence, the dismemberment, it points strongly to this known killer called the Axeman. But Lulubelle's body was never found.
And L.T. is devastated. He's shaking and crying, facing this unthinkable void. But he refuses to accept the Axeman narrative.
He clings to this persistent alternative story. He chooses to believe Lulubelle is alive somewhere.
Singing in a small-town Nevada casino, or even working as a prostitute in a legal brothel. Anything at all, to avoid the certainty of her being a mutilated victim.
He finds this defiant comfort in these alternative scenarios. And his friend, the narrator, realizes that LT isn't stating what he believes. He's stating what he wishes he could believe. It's a persistent, repeated fantasy.
And the power of that narrative choice is profound because, as King notes, since Lulubelle's body was never found, LT is, technically speaking, right.
He's using a technicality to preserve his sanity. He knows his fantasy is wildly improbable, especially given what happened to the dog.
Yet he repeats that story to himself just to avoid the reality that only the dog's bones remain.
So we end here at the collection's final philosophical question, looping right back to that idea of repetition and choice. When the evidence of horror is overwhelming, it's clinging to a technically true but wildly improbable story, a necessary form of perseverance. Is it the only way to avoid that total psychological collapse, that nervous breakdown Howard Cottrell narrowly avoided?
Or is it just the ultimate act of self-delusion, masking an emotional truth he just can't face? The stories we tell ourselves about the darkest, most unanswerable truths might just be the only things that keep us alive.
And that leaves you, the listener, with something to mull over. If reality is the repetition of inescapable chaos, like Davis and Darlene's story suggest, then maybe the only way to break the loop is through the creative, even delusional assertion of a new, better story.
So what impossible truth are you currently clinging to? And how is that fiction sustaining your reality? Think about it. We'll see you next time on The Deep Dive.